The moment Eleanor Voss realized her marriage was already over, she was standing in a hallway that smelled of fresh flowers and expensive cologne, holding a glass of champagne she had not touched. The gala was crowded with people in beautiful clothes saying beautiful things to each other, and somewhere near the fireplace, her husband was doing what he did best, commanding a room, filling it with his presence, making every man nearby feel slightly lesser and every woman feel slightly breathless. Eleanor had loved watching him once. That night, she simply watched. She had stepped out of the main hall to find a quieter moment, just a breath of air away from the noise, when she heard his voice carrying through the half-open door of the adjoining study. Deep, controlled, unhurried, the voice of a man who had never once questioned whether he was worth listening to. "She is only my wife," Damien said. "Do not mistake the arrangement for something more." There was laughter after that. Relaxed, careless laughter. The kind shared between men who have known each other long enough to say anything. Eleanor did not move. She stood in that hallway for a long moment, the champagne going warm in her hand, and she felt something shift deep inside her chest. Not breaking. Not even cracking. Just a quiet, decisive click, like a lock turning. She set the glass down on a side table. She smoothed the front of her gown. She walked back into the party, smiled at 3 people who greeted her, danced once with a family friend, and at 10 minutes past 10, told Damien she had a headache and would take the car home early. He nodded without fully looking at her and turned back to his conversation before she had even finished her sentence. The drive home was 20 minutes. She spent it looking at the passing street lights and thinking, with extraordinary calm, about the 7 years she had given to a man who had just summarized them in 8 words. Damien Ashford had not always been cold. Or perhaps he had always been cold and Eleanor had simply been too determined to believe otherwise. She had met him at a charity event in the spring, 7 years ago. He was 31, already a name that meant something in the world of old money and older property. She was 26, working in art administration, wearing a blue dress she had borrowed from her sister and trying not to spill red wine on the white tablecloth. He had sat next to her at dinner by some arrangement she later suspected was not accidental. He was sharp and funny in a restrained way, the kind of funny that made you feel clever for catching it. He asked about her work with genuine curiosity, or what felt like genuine curiosity. He held doors and pulled out chairs without making a performance of it. When she mentioned her mother had recently passed, he did not offer the usual hollow words. He simply said, "I am sorry. That kind of loss does not have a tidy end." And she had looked at him differently after that. They were married 14 months later in a ceremony that the society pages described as elegant and understated. Her sister cried. His mother smiled with her mouth but not her eyes. Eleanor wore her grandmother's pearl earrings and held Damien's hand through the whole reception and told herself that this was the beginning of something real. What she did not understand then, and spent 6.5 years learning, was that Damien Ashford did not do real. He did appearances. He did obligations. He did excellent taste and impeccable manners and a kind of distant warmth that was very convincing at social events and completely absent at home. Their life together had a shape to it. He woke early. He worked late. They dined together perhaps 4 evenings a week, and conversation at the table was pleasant and shallow, the kind exchanged by people who are not quite comfortable with silence but have nothing urgent to say to each other. He complimented her when she dressed well. He thanked her when she hosted his colleagues. On their anniversaries he gave her beautiful gifts, chosen with care, delivered with the warmth of a business transaction completed satisfactorily. Eleanor had tried, in the beginning, to push past the surface. She had asked him questions he found uncomfortable. She had reached for him in the mornings before he was fully awake, in the hope that without his careful composure assembled he might be someone softer. She had brought home books she thought he would love, left them on his desk with small notes tucked inside. She had cooked meals she learned from scratch because she overheard him once say he missed his grandmother's cooking. She had covered for him at events when his coldness made people uncomfortable, smoothing the air with a laugh or a well-placed question, protecting his image without him ever once asking her to. For a while she told herself he was simply a man who expressed love differently. That he showed care through provision, through reliability, through the fact that the house was always warm and her bank account never empty and her calendar always included. She told herself this for 3 years, then 2 more, then another one after that. But time has a way of making the truth unavoidable. There was a night, perhaps 2 years into the marriage, when she had been unwell, a fever that had come on suddenly, leaving her exhausted and shaken by it in the evening. Damien was at a dinner she had organized with his business associates. He came home at 11 to find her still awake, sitting in the kitchen wrapped in a blanket, trying to keep down water. He looked at her for a moment. He asked if she had called the doctor. She said no. He said she should have. He went upstairs. In the morning he left before she woke. She did not expect a man to fall apart over a common fever. She only wished, in that particular moment, that he had sat down beside her. That was all. Just that. There were smaller moments too. The way he never initiated holding her hand unless they were in public. The way her stories from the day seemed to land somewhere just past his attention, acknowledged but not received. The way he never asked about her work, her dreams, the book she was reading, the call she had made to her sister. The way she could feel, with increasing clarity, that she was someone who lived in his house and ran his home and accompanied him to events and kept everything precisely as he needed it, and that this was, from his perspective, a complete and satisfactory arrangement. She had thought about leaving before. Many times. But leaving felt large and final in a way she was not ready to face, and besides, she had built her life inside this marriage and she did not yet know who she would be outside of it. That night, returning from the gala, the car moving through dark winter streets, she finally asked herself the question she had been avoiding for years. If she left tomorrow, what would Damien lose? A wife who ran his household. A woman who remembered the names of everyone he worked with, kept track of his diary, organized his social life, managed his correspondence with people he found tedious, and made his home a place worth coming back to. Not a person. A function. And the quieter, sharper question beneath that one. If she stayed, what would she gain? More of this. 7 more years of being described, by the man she married, as an arrangement. She reached the house before him. She climbed the stairs slowly, not out of exhaustion but out of the particular heaviness that comes when a long-held hope finally lets go. She went into the bedroom they shared, took off the pearl earrings she had been wearing since their wedding, set them carefully on the nightstand. She looked at the wedding ring on her left hand for a long moment. Then she placed it down beside the earrings. She did not cry. She had cried enough in private over the years to have emptied that particular reservoir. Instead she felt something she had not expected. She felt clear. Not happy, not free, not certain of the future. Just clear. The fog of hoping and waiting and adjusting and forgiving and trying and failing and trying again had, in the space of 8 words overheard in a hallway, finally lifted. And what was left underneath all of it was simply her own face, looking back at her. She got into bed. She lay in the dark. And for the first time in years, she slept without the particular anxiety of a woman waiting for a door that might not open. When Damien came home later that night, he moved quietly as he always did. He set his cufflinks on the dresser. He used the bathroom. He got into bed without waking her, or without trying to. He did not notice the ring on the nightstand until morning, and by then Eleanor had already made her coffee and was standing at the kitchen window watching the winter garden and thinking about Tuesday. She had chosen Tuesday because it was the most ordinary day of the week. Not a Monday with its drama of beginnings, not a Friday weighted with the end of things. Just Tuesday, plain and unremarkable, which was exactly what she wanted her departure to look like. Not a scene. Not a statement. Just a door, quietly closing. She had been planning it for 4 months. The planning had surprised her when it started, not because leaving felt wrong, but because she had discovered, somewhere in the careful construction of her exit, that she was considerably more capable than 7 years of marriage had led her to believe. She had opened a bank account in her name alone. She had contacted the director of a gallery in the city who had offered her a job 2 years ago, one she had turned down because Damien found the hours inconvenient. The director had, remarkably, still wanted her. She had found a flat, small, on the 4th floor, with a window that looked out over rooftops, and paid the deposit on it from money she had quietly accumulated over months, from the household budget she managed and the careful, quiet economies she made. She had called her sister, Catherine, for the first time in 8 months. Catherine had not asked for an explanation. She had simply said, "Tell me what you need and when," and Eleanor had felt something loosen in her chest that she had not known was tight. She told no one else. She went about her life exactly as she always had, organized Damien's diary, answered his correspondence, attended 2 more social events on his arm, smiled appropriately, remembered everyone's names. She did it all without anger and without performance. She was simply serving out the remaining time, as people do. On Monday evening she packed 1 suitcase. Not 2, not 4, 1. She took her clothes, her grandmother's pearl earrings, the photograph of her mother from the dresser drawer, and a small box of personal things that had always been hers alone. She left everything else. The house, the art, the furniture, the kitchen that she had chosen and the garden that she had planted and the bedroom curtains she had picked out after 3 weeks of searching. She left it all without a backward look, because none of it had ever truly made her feel at home. On Tuesday morning, Damien left for a board meeting at 8:45. He said goodbye with his usual briskness, a nod in her direction, his jacket already buttoned, his mind already at the table before his body arrived there. She said goodbye back. She watched the car go down the drive. Then she picked up her suitcase, walked out the front door, and did not look back. She left only one thing behind, placed on the kitchen table where he would find it when he returned. A single sheet of paper, in her handwriting, with one line. "I release you from the arrangement." She had thought about writing more. She had thought about the letter she could write, all the things she had swallowed over 7 years, all the nights she had lain awake trying to understand where the warmth had gone, all the small invisible labors he had never once noticed or thanked her for. She could have written pages. But she did not. Because she was not doing this for him. She was not doing this to make him understand, or to wound him, or to finally be heard. She was doing this for herself. And she did not need his understanding to make it real. The taxi took her to the flat. She rode the 4 flights of stairs with her suitcase and unlocked the door and stood in the small, bare entrance hall. There were no curtains yet. There was a second-hand sofa she had arranged to be delivered the day before, and a kettle on the kitchen counter, and a mug that said nothing, which was exactly how she liked it. She put her suitcase down. She opened the window. The rooftops of the city stretched out in front of her, ordinary and indifferent and absolutely hers. She stood there for a long time. Then she made herself a cup of tea and sat on the sofa and called her sister, and when Catherine answered and said, "Did you do it?" Eleanor said yes and felt, against all expectation, like herself. The house knew before Damien did. This was not a poetic observation, it was simply true. The people who lived alongside the daily rhythms of Ashford House noticed Eleanor's absence in the way you notice a sound that has stopped, not because it was ever loud, but because its presence had become so woven into the normal fabric of the day that its removal left an odd, misshapen silence. Agnes, who had cooked for the Ashfords for 11 years, noticed it first. She arrived at 7:30 on Tuesday morning as usual, moved through the kitchen, found the coffee already made and still warm, found the fridge as Eleanor always left it, organized, labeled, precisely stocked, found the small note on the counter that said simply, "Thank you, Agnes, for everything." Agnes read it twice. Then she sat down at the kitchen table and pressed her palms flat against the surface, the way people do when they need to feel something solid. Gerald, who managed the house and the grounds, noticed at noon when he came in to ask about a repair that had been pending and found no one at the desk in the small study Eleanor used. The desk was clean. Not the clean of someone who had stepped out for an hour. The clean of someone who had sorted and organized and left nothing unfinished before departing. Damien returned at 6:40 in the evening. He came in through the side entrance as he always did, set his bag down, moved toward the kitchen, and found Agnes already gone for the day and dinner prepared and covered on the counter. He lifted the cover, served himself, sat at the dining table, and ate. It was not until he was nearly finished that he noticed the house had a different quality to it, quieter in a way that was not simply the absence of noise. He went upstairs. He passed the small study. He saw the clean desk. He stood in the doorway for a moment, then went on to the bedroom. The wedding ring was gone from the nightstand. He had noticed it that morning, assumed she had simply put it on later than usual. Now there was only the pearl earrings and a faint mark on the wood where the ring had rested every night for 7 years. He went back downstairs. He found the note on the kitchen table. He read it once. "I release you from the arrangement." He read it again. He set it down. He poured himself a drink. He stood at the kitchen window where Eleanor had stood that morning, though he did not know this, and looked out at the dark winter garden. His first thought, which he would later find very difficult to admit to himself, was that this was inconvenient. There were 2 events in the next 3 weeks he had expected her to attend with him. There was the matter of the household running without her coordination. There was the question of what to tell people. His second thought arrived more slowly, a few minutes later, while the ice in his glass was melting. She had planned this. This was not a reaction, not a sudden departure fueled by a night's worth of feeling. The clean desk, the organized fridge, the note that was 8 words long, this had been prepared. This had been decided not tonight but weeks ago, possibly months ago. While he had been going about his life, assuming she was simply there, she had been quietly, methodically, building her way out. The realization landed somewhere uncomfortable. He called his solicitor that evening and again the next morning. He looked into the accounts, found everything in order, nothing taken that had not always been hers. He wrote 2 texts to Eleanor's phone and received no response. He called once and it went to voicemail. Her voice on the recording was brisk and professional and told him nothing. He told his office assistant that his wife was visiting family for a few weeks. He told his mother, who called 2 days later with some instinct for disruption, that he and Eleanor were taking some time apart. His mother was quiet for a moment and then said, "What did you do, Damien?" He told her she was overreacting. The first week was manageable. He had his work, which was abundant, and his routine, which was iron, and the house was still running because Agnes came every day and Gerald managed the property. The surface of his life was intact. But surfaces have limits. By the second week he began to notice the things that Eleanor had done that he had never once registered as being done. His diary had 3 appointments he had missed because they had not been transferred from the old calendar system she had always managed. A letter from a family solicitor that needed a response had been sitting on the kitchen counter for days because no one had known to prioritize it. A dinner he had promised a colleague had not been booked because the booking had always been made by Eleanor, who remembered these things without being asked. Small things. But they accumulated. A business acquaintance named Peter Holt called him the 3rd week to ask after Eleanor. Peter was the kind of man who remembered details and asked after wives with genuine interest, and he said simply, "She always made these evenings work, you know. I hope she is well." Damien said she was fine, just traveling. After the call he sat at his desk for a few minutes without doing anything. He began, in the evenings, to move through the house differently. He went into rooms he did not usually visit. The small sitting room Eleanor used in the afternoons. The kitchen in the mornings before Agnes arrived. The study where she had worked at the clean, organized desk. He found things. In the pocket of an overcoat he had not worn in weeks, a small folded note in Eleanor's handwriting. "Your 2 o'clock on the 15th has been moved to 4. Also, wear the grey tie, the navy one pulls too much in photographs." He stood holding the note for a longer time than made any sense. He went through the coat rack. He found another note in a different coat. "The whole dinner is Italian, you mentioned you cannot eat pine nuts at the moment. I have already told the restaurant." He found a third. "Your mother's birthday is the 22nd. You forgot last year. You were upset with yourself for a week afterward." He found a 4th, a 5th, a 6th. Small careful notes accumulated over years, tucked quietly into pockets for him to find or not find, asking nothing, expecting nothing, simply trying to make his life run smoother without his ever having to think about it. He carried them to the kitchen and spread them out on the table. There were 14. He read each one. He had lived in that house for 9 years. He had been married to Eleanor for 7 of them. He had never once noticed that his coats were full of her handwriting. His Aunt Margot came to visit at the end of the 3rd week. She was his father's older sister, a direct woman who dressed well and said exactly what she thought and was the only person Damien had ever fully respected. She sat across from him in the sitting room, looked at the house, looked at him, and said, "Where is Eleanor?" He gave the same answer he had been giving everyone. Margot looked at him for a moment with an expression that was not unkind but was completely without illusion. Then she said, "What did you do to that woman?" "Nothing," he said. "That," Margot said quietly, "is almost certainly the problem." She did not stay long. She drank her tea and spoke about other things and left, and Damien sat in the empty house after her departure and found he could not concentrate on anything for the rest of the evening. He thought about Eleanor that night in a different way than he had been thinking about her. Not about the inconvenience, not about the social situation, not about the logistics of a marriage dissolving. He thought about her face the last time he had really looked at it. He could not, with precision, remember when that had been. He tried to remember a recent conversation. A real one, not an exchange of information, not an update on the diary or the household or an upcoming event. A conversation where they had talked about something that mattered to one of them. He could not find one. He tried to remember the last time she had laughed at something he said. The last time he had asked about her day and genuinely wanted the answer. The last time he had looked across a room at her and thought something other than "she looks appropriate tonight" or "she has managed this well." He could not find those either. He poured a second drink and went to bed early and lay in the dark for a long time and understood, with the particular clarity that comes too late, that the house was not quiet because Eleanor had left. The house was quiet because Eleanor had been the noise. Not noise that disrupted, but the steady, warm hum of a person fully present, someone who noticed things and fixed things and cared about things and brought herself, entirely, to the life she was living. And he had never once, in 7 years, told her that he noticed. A mutual friend named Caroline, who moved in the same social circles and was careful with information and loyal to both parties in the way that only genuinely decent people manage to be, came to see Damien 6 weeks after Eleanor's departure. She sat in the kitchen and accepted a cup of tea and then, without preamble, said, "I saw Eleanor last week. She is doing well. She looks well." "Good," Damien said. Caroline looked at him the way Margot had looked at him. "She is working at the Whitmore Gallery. She seems, lighter is the word I would use. Like someone who has put down a weight they did not know they were carrying." He said nothing. He looked at the table. Caroline set down her cup. "She has not said a word against you to anyone. Not one word. Which says a great deal about the kind of woman she is." He knew that. He had always known the kind of woman she was. He had simply failed to understand what that meant, or what it cost her, or what it was worth. After Caroline left, he sat in the kitchen for a long time. Outside the window the garden was bare and winter grey. Eleanor had planted bulbs in October every year, and come spring the garden would bloom with the results of her work, and she would not be there to see it. He put his head in his hands and stayed like that for a while. Not weeping, exactly. Just allowing something to be heavy in him that he had been refusing to acknowledge for weeks. He had spent his adult life believing that distance was dignity. That being unmoved was the same as being strong. That need was a kind of weakness, and showing it was weaker still. He had watched his father move through their home like a man who required nothing from anyone and had privately admired it, had shaped himself in that image, had believed that this was what it meant to be a man of standing. What he had not understood, and was only now beginning to understand, was that his father had been desperately unhappy. And that he had married a woman exactly like his father, which meant he had, without knowing it, made himself into someone who could not be reached. He thought about Eleanor's notes in his coat pockets. He thought about the dinners she made from recipes she taught herself. He thought about the way she had covered for his coldness in rooms full of people, deflecting with a warm word or a well-timed laugh, protecting him without his knowledge and without any expectation of thanks. He thought about the night she had been ill and he had gone to bed. He thought about the gala. She is only my wife. Do not mistake the arrangement for something more. He had said that. He had meant it, in the casual unthinking way that people mean things they have never examined. He had not said it to wound her. He had said it because it was simply how the marriage lived in his mind, a structure, a form, a correct and tidy arrangement that required maintenance but not feeling. He wondered if she had heard him. He was almost certain she had. A lawyer named Philip who handled affairs for the Ashford family contacted Damien in the 7th week to inform him that he had received, on Damien's behalf, a request from Eleanor's solicitor to begin proceedings. Everything was handled with quiet efficiency. Eleanor was not asking for anything unreasonable. She was not attempting to wound him through legal means. She was simply, as she had always done, organizing the situation with clarity and care. Damien met with Philip and then sat in the meeting room alone for a while after Philip had gone. The papers were on the table. His name and hers on the same document, a line drawn through the middle of everything they had built and been and failed to be. He thought about contesting it. He thought about asking to see her. Not to beg, not even to explain, he was not sure what he would say, but simply because he found, now that she was genuinely and permanently living, that he was not as indifferent as he had always believed himself to be. He called her. She answered on the 3rd ring, which surprised him. Her voice was steady and unrevealing. He asked if they could meet. She agreed, with what seemed like fairness rather than warmth. She named a cafe in the city, a public place, in the afternoon. He arrived first. He chose a table near the window. He ordered coffee and then, when she walked in, stood out of habit and watched her cross the room. She looked well. Caroline had been right about that. She was wearing clothes he had not seen before, chosen for herself rather than for an event. Her hair was slightly different. She moved without the careful, monitored quality he had grown so accustomed to, the slight adjustment that happened when she was in a room with him, the small bracing. She sat across from him and ordered tea and said, "It is good to see you, Damien." Not warm, not cold. Civil, the civility of someone who has processed her grief and arrived somewhere past it. He had prepared things to say. They evaporated. He said, "You are looking well." She said, "I am well." He said, "I understand you are working at the Whitmore." She said she was. She said it with a small brightness that was not performed, that came from somewhere genuine, and he saw in that brightness the shape of a life she had been prevented from living while she was married to him. He could not think how to begin. She did not help him. She was not cold, but she was not easing his path either. She owed him nothing, including comfort. He said, "I found your notes." In the coats. She tilted her head slightly. "I had forgotten about those." "There were 14 of them," he said. She looked at her tea. "You never forgot anything," he said. "You never overlooked anything. 7 years and I cannot remember a single thing that needed doing that you had not already done." She was quiet. "I did not tell you," he said. I did not acknowledge it. Any of it." She looked up at him. Her expression was not angry. That would have been easier. It was something more carefully composed than anger, something like the face of a person who has already moved through a difficult country and does not intend to go back to it. "No," she said. "You did not?" "I am sorry," he said. It was insufficient and he knew it. She nodded slowly. "I know you are," she said. "I think you are genuinely sorry." "I believe that." She was quiet for a moment. "But Damien, I spent 7 years hoping you would see me. I cannot spend more time waiting for the apology." He had no argument against that. They finished their coffee and their tea. He walked her to the street afterward and she thanked him for coming and said she hoped he was taking care of himself. She said it the way a decent person says it to someone they once loved and have since let go of. Genuinely, but from a distance. He watched her walk down the street. She did not look back. He stood on the pavement for a while after she had turned the corner, in the noise of the city, in the perfectly ordinary afternoon, and understood that he had just lost, not in the moment of her departure 6 weeks ago, but right now, in this small cafe, in the space between her civility and his inadequate apology, the most significant person his life had ever contained. He went home. He signed the papers. He did not contest them. He called his Aunt Margot that evening, and when she answered he said, without preparation or preamble, "I think I need help." Margot was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Yes. I know. I have known for quite some time." She gave him the name of a man named Dr. Owen Fry, a therapist she trusted, and told him to call in the morning. He wrote the name down. He sat with it. He had spent his adult life moving away from need, from vulnerability, from the kind of openness that his upbringing had taught him to associate with weakness. He had built himself into a man who was formidable and capable and admired and extraordinarily alone. And the woman who had chosen, against all evidence, to love him anyway, to fill his coats with careful handwriting, to learn his grandmother's recipes, to smooth the air behind him in every room, had eventually, inevitably, understood that she deserved more than what he was able to give. He did not sleep well that night. But for the first time since her departure, he was not thinking about the inconvenience of her absence. He was thinking about her. Eleanor. The person. What she had carried. What it had cost her. What she deserved. And he thought, in the particular quiet of 3 in the morning, that the least he could do, the very least, the smallest beginning of something resembling what he should have been, was to stop calling it an arrangement and start understanding it as a loss. The first therapy session lasted 50 minutes, and Damien spent the better part of 40 of them explaining, in measured tones, that he was handling the situation quite well. Dr. Owen Fry was a man of perhaps 60, quiet in the way that was not passive but deliberate, who listened without nodding too much and did not offer easy agreement. He asked a small number of precise questions and allowed the silence after each one to stretch until Damien filled it. At the end of the session, Dr. Fry said only, "You are welcome to come back." Damien said he was not sure it had been useful. Dr. Fry said, "That is fine. Most people feel that way the first time." Damien came back. He came back the following week and the week after that, and somewhere in the third session, when Dr. Fry asked him to describe a moment in the marriage when he had been happy, not satisfied, not comfortable, but genuinely and quietly happy, Damien opened his mouth to answer and found that the words he had prepared were not the right ones. He put them down. He sat with the question. He thought for a long time. And then, to his considerable surprise, he said, "There was a Sunday. It was summer. We had no plans. Eleanor was reading in the garden and I came outside and she didn't look up because she was in the middle of something, and I sat in the chair across from her and read as well, and we were out there for 3 hours without saying anything in particular, and I remember thinking that this was enough. That this was what enough felt like." He stopped. He looked at his hands. "I never told her that," he said. Dr. Fry said nothing. "I never told her anything like that," Damien said. He went home that evening and sat at the desk in his study and took out a piece of writing paper and began a letter to Eleanor. He got 4 lines in before he stopped. He folded the paper and set it aside. The next evening he tried again. And the evening after. He wrote 4 different letters in 4 weeks and sent none of them, not because what he wrote was untrue but because he was beginning to understand, slowly, through the grinding work of looking at himself clearly, that sending a letter to Eleanor was not the point. The point was not to get her back. The point was to understand what he had been, so that he did not remain it. Dr. Fry helped him see the shape of things. The father who had modeled distance as dignity. The childhood home where emotion was a private matter, kept behind doors, never discussed. The repeated lesson, absorbed so early it had become bone, that needing people was something to manage rather than something to accept. "You did not withhold love from Eleanor to hurt her," Dr. Fry said in one session. "No," Damien agreed. "You withheld it because you were afraid of what it would mean to give it." Damien was quiet for a moment. "I was afraid," he said, "that if I showed her she mattered, truly showed her, then I would be in a position where losing her would destroy something. And now? Damien looked at the window. And now she is gone. And the thing I was afraid of is happening anyway. He began to read. Not the business literature and financial analysis that had always lined his shelves, but other things, books about the interior life, about the patterns people carry from their earliest years, about what it means to be present to someone. He read with the focus he had always applied to work, and he felt, page by page, the accumulation of a grief that was not simply about Eleanor but about everything he had sealed away in himself for 40 years. He wept once, in the middle of the night, alone in the house. He sat on the floor of the bedroom with his back against the bed and felt everything he had refused to feel for his entire adult life, and it was larger and more difficult and also more real than anything he had experienced in memory. When it passed, he felt, unexpectedly, something close to relief. Like a wound that has been cleaned at last. He called his mother. This in itself was unusual. She generally called him and he answered. He asked how she was. He asked about her health, her garden, the small concerns of her daily life that he had never previously shown interest in. She was confused for a moment and then, without comment on the change, she answered him. They talked for an hour. At the end of the call she said, quietly, "Your father was not a happy man, Damien. I hope you know that what I valued was not his reserve. I endured his reserve." He thanked her. He reached out to his oldest friend, a man named George who had known him since university and who had grown accustomed over years to receiving very little from Damien by way of real conversation. George came over one evening and they sat in the kitchen and Damien, with effort, said, "I have not been good to people who were close to me. I am trying to understand why." George looked at him with the careful expression of someone receiving unexpected information and trying to assess whether it is genuine. Then he said, "I am glad you are here, then." It was not an absolution. Damien did not want absolution. He wanted, for the first time, to be accountable. To look at what he had done and not excuse it and not explain it away but simply say, "Here is the damage, and I caused it, and I am going to spend whatever time is necessary learning how not to repeat it." The divorce was finalized on a Thursday morning. Philip called to confirm it. Damien sat in his office afterward and thought about Eleanor. Not with the hollow loss of a man who does not know what he had, he knew exactly what he had now. He thought about her the way you think about someone you have failed, with the specific weight of having understood the failure too completely to be able to set it down. He thought about the life she was living. The gallery. The flat with the rooftop view he had heard mentioned by Caroline. The sister she had returned to. The version of herself she was rebuilding from the foundation up, unencumbered by a marriage that had spent years reducing her to a useful and beautiful and utterly invisible woman. He hoped she was happy. He meant it without reservation and without anything underneath it that was for himself. He hoped she was happy in the way that you hope for something you know you did not deserve and cannot alter, the way you hope when all you can offer the world is the fact of having finally, genuinely changed. He was not finished changing. He understood that. The understanding was perhaps the first truly honest thing he had arrived at in years. He asked Dr. Fry, in a session near the end of the first year, whether he thought it was possible, genuinely possible, not theoretically, for a man who had lived his entire adult life inside a kind of emotional absence to learn to live differently. Dr. Fry considered this with his usual careful quiet. Then he said, "What I have seen is that the men who ask that question with genuine uncertainty, not rhetorically, not as a form of self-pity, but because they truly do not know the answer, those men are usually already most of the way there." Damien nodded. He sat with that for a while. The question, Dr. Fry added, is not whether you can learn to feel differently. You already have. The question is whether you can give what you have learned to someone, in time. Outside the office the afternoon was cold and clear. Damien walked home instead of taking the car, as he had been doing lately, because he found that walking allowed him to think without the guard that came with being in motion. He thought about the life ahead. Not the social landscape of it, not the career or the property or the things by which he had always measured himself. The interior life of it. The version of himself that was learning, slowly and with difficulty, to be present. To be known. He passed a bookshop. He stopped and went in and found something he thought his mother might enjoy and bought it, and had it wrapped, and posted it to her that afternoon with a card that simply said, "Thinking of you." No occasion. No reason except that she mattered and he wanted her to know it. He went home. He made his own dinner, which he had been doing for months now and was not yet particularly good at but was getting better. He sat at the kitchen table and ate it and looked at the garden outside, bare still from winter, but with the first pale green beginnings of the bulbs Eleanor had planted in October coming up through the soil. She would not see them. But they were here. He stayed at the table for a long time after dinner, in the quiet house, in the life he was slowly and painstakingly rebuilding into something that a person could actually inhabit. Not a structure. Not an arrangement. A life. The conference was held in a building near the river, one of those converted industrial spaces that had been made to feel modern and purposeful, with high ceilings and long windows and the kind of soft lighting that made everyone appear slightly more distinguished than they were. Eleanor Voss had been invited to speak on the subject of institutional trust in the arts, how galleries build loyalty with their communities, how the relationship between an institution and its audience is maintained through honesty and consistency and genuine engagement. She had not expected, when she agreed to the invitation 4 months ago, that she would feel nervous standing backstage. She had spoken in public before, during her marriage, at events organized around Damien's interests where she stood at podiums and said careful and appropriate things on behalf of causes she had been asked to support. But this was different. This was her own expertise, her own knowledge, her own name on the program. This was Eleanor Voss, not Eleanor Ashford, not the wife of, not the woman beside, just her. She walked onto the stage. 200 faces looked back at her. She looked at them for a brief moment, took a breath, and began. She spoke for 35 minutes. She had prepared carefully, as she always did, but she also allowed herself to depart from the prepared version when something she felt strongly about surfaced in the moment. She talked about the way institutions often treat their audiences as consumers rather than as participants. She talked about the quiet damage done when people in authority underestimate the intelligence of the people they are supposed to serve. She talked, with a careful and deliberate precision, about the connection between being truly seen and being truly loyal, how the deepest form of trust is built not through spectacle but through the accumulated evidence that someone has paid attention. Several people in the room leaned forward slightly as she spoke. She noticed this and found it grounding. When she finished there was applause, the genuine kind that does not stop quickly, and a woman in the front row caught her eye and nodded with a small smile that meant something. Eleanor stepped down from the stage and was immediately surrounded by people who wanted to talk, which she welcomed, which would have been unthinkable to the version of herself who had spent 7 years trying not to take up too much space. She spoke to a gallery director from the north. She spoke to a young curator who was nervous and asked questions she recognized from her own early career. She spoke to a man from a funding organization who wanted her advice on something practical, and she gave it, precisely and without hedging, and he wrote things down. And then, at the edge of the room, near the back where the light did not quite reach, she saw Damien. She recognized the shape of him before she recognized his face. The particular way he stood, upright, still, that habitual composure that had once seemed so impressive and now seemed, from this distance and this direction, like the stance of a man who did not know how to let his guard down. He was wearing a dark coat. He had not tried to position himself where she would notice him. He was simply there. He was looking at her. Not with the assessment that had always characterized his attention, that way of looking that registered whether she was appropriate, whether she was performing her role correctly, whether the surface was satisfactory. He was looking at her the way you look at something you have lost and cannot get back, with a quality of attention that was too late to be useful but was at last, real. She did not go to him. She finished her conversations, accepted a card from the young curator, agreed to a follow-up meeting with the funding man, and then navigated the room in a direction that would bring her past where Damien was standing. She did this without drama, without deliberately avoiding him or deliberately seeking him. He straightened slightly as she approached. She stopped. "Damien," she said. "Eleanor." He looked at her with that new kind of looking that she had noticed from across the room. "You were extraordinary up there." "Thank you." A bit of silence. Not the old silence, the one that had lived between them for years, waited and careful and full of things not said. Just a pause. I came because Caroline told me about the conference, he said. I did not plan to speak with you. I wanted to see how you were. She looked at him steadily. I am well, she said. I am genuinely well. I can see that. Something in his face shifted slightly. It is different from how you looked when we were married. Yes, she said. She did not offer more than that. She did not need to protect him from the truth of it, and she was also not interested in using it to wound him. I have been doing a great deal of thinking, he said. And working. On myself. With help. He said this without the embarrassment such an admission would once have caused him, and she noticed the absence of it. I am not saying this to you as a means to anything. I know you are not, I know there is no returning. I simply want you to know that I have spent a year understanding what I was. What I failed to be. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. She was not moved to tears, not moved to warmth or to anger. She was moved to something more careful, a measured, honest acknowledgement. I believe you, she said. I think the fact that you are here, not to ask for anything, just to say that, I think that matters. Does it help? He asked. She thought about it genuinely. A little, she said. Not in the way that changes anything. But in the way that, yes. A little. He nodded. He was not going to ask for more than that. She could see that he understood the limit and was not trying to exceed it. She said, I hope you are being good to yourself. I am learning how, he said. She held out her hand. He took it. They shook hands in the way of two people who have concluded a long and complicated chapter and are standing at the edge of what comes after. Then she let go. Take care, Damien, she said. You as well, Eleanor. She turned and walked back into the room, toward the conversation and the people and the work that was hers. She did not look back. Not out of cruelty, not as a performance of indifference, she simply did not need to. Everything she was moving toward was ahead of her, and she was not interested in standing still. She collected her coat and her bag at the end of the evening. She said goodbye to the organizer who thanked her warmly. She walked out of the building and down the steps and onto the street, where the evening air was cool and smelled faintly of rain. The river was visible at the end of the road, dark and moving. She stood for a moment on the pavement. She was not thinking about Damien, not with sadness, not with relief, not with anything that required resolution. She was thinking about the woman in the front row who had nodded at her. She was thinking about the young curator who had asked such good questions. She was thinking about tomorrow, the gallery at 9, a new acquisition to assess, a meeting with the board, lunch with Catherine who was coming to the city for the week. She was thinking about Saturday, when she planned to go to a small exhibition she had read about in the east of the city. She was thinking about the novel on her nightstand that she had been reading without having to consider whether someone else found the light too bright. She was thinking about the rooftop view from her flat, and the way the city looked on clear mornings, and the particular quality of silence in rooms that are entirely your own. She pulled on her coat. She stepped off the pavement and began to walk, not because she had somewhere urgent to be but because the evening was hers and the city was hers and the direction was hers to choose. A year ago she had placed a ring on a nightstand and walked out of a cold house into an unknown future, with one suitcase and 14 notes she did not know she was leaving behind. She had walked out not knowing what she was walking toward, only knowing, with that quiet and decisive clarity, what she was walking away from. She knew now. She was walking toward this. The conference. The gallery. The sister, the curator, the woman in the front row, the novel, the flat, the rooftops, the mornings, the choices. The life that was hers in every direction. She did not need to be seen by him anymore. She had spent 7 years trying to be seen by someone who was not capable of the seeing, and the great gift of the last 12 months was the discovery that she could see herself. That she was, in fact, the most reliable witness to her own existence, and that this was not a sad truth but a freeing one. She walked the 20 minutes home in the evening air. She let herself into the building and climbed the 4 flights of stairs. She put her key in the lock and opened the door to the flat and stood in the entrance hall for a moment, as she still sometimes did, simply feeling the particular quality of a space that asked nothing of her and welcomed her back. She hung up her coat. She filled the kettle. She went to the window and looked out at the rooftops of the city, which in the early dark were lit from below, warm and various and alive. She thought, briefly, of Damien standing at the back of the room. She hoped he was getting better, sincerely, the way you hope for someone whose pain you understand even if you are no longer able to fix it. She hoped the work he was doing on himself was leading somewhere real. She hoped, with genuine openness and no remainder of bitterness, that he would learn to be present for someone. Some other someone, someday, when he was ready. She turned away from the window. The kettle boiled. She made her tea. She sat on the sofa in her small, entirely hers, quietly extraordinary flat, and she opened her book, and she read, and outside the city moved and breathed and went on without needing anything from her, and she went on without needing anything from it, and this ordinary Tuesday evening, just this freedom, just this peace, was exactly enough.